Hey, okay, looks like I am live. Hello, everyone, joining me for the lunchtime chat. I'm going to get started in about 2 or 3 minutes, give people a chance to join the group, and then we will dive in. And if you are watching live, if you could just let me know that you're here, you can, type a hi or a waving emoji or whatever you like. And I apologize if it gets occasionally noisy. My office is next to a train route, and occasionally there are trains going by, and I'm not sure if the mic is picking it up. All right, I am just going to pull my notes up on my phone. I'll be right with you. Hi, Cam Sams. Thank you for joining us, or rather me. So I will be getting started in about a minute. If anyone else would like to join. Oh, dope. I am, or my father is from Barbados, so I'm Bayesian. We're neighbors. Very cool. I was in Barbados earlier this year. I want to go back so badly as soon as possible. Okay, so I am going to get started. Hi, everyone joining me live and folks who may watch this chat later. My name is Nadine Thornhill. I am a sexuality educator based in Toronto, Ontario. And most of my work focuses on child and adolescent sexuality. And one of my favorite topics to talk about is consent, and specifically the relationship between pleasure and consent, because I think that they are inextricably linked. And so we are going to dive into how they are connected and how we can really use pleasure as a tool for negotiating consent in our relationships in a meaningful way. So before I get into everything, I just want to say off the bat, I have ADHD, and sometimes that presents itself as me talking really quickly, particularly when I'm excited, and particularly when I'm in this sort of format where, I'm chatting with people, but I can't see you or really sort of, gauge your facial expressions. So if you happen to feel that I am talking super, super fast or you can't understand me, just ping me in the comments, because I am watching the comments, and I will slow it down. Also, I'm at my home office today, and I have a cat who sometimes likes to just walk in while I'm doing stuff. So if you see a big cat tail walk by, that's my cat. Oh, thank you for the compliment about my hair. All right, so a little bit more about me. I have been a sexuality educator for over 12 years now. I worked for several years with Planned Parenthood in Ottawa, where I used to live. And then I spent some time in California working on my doctorate, where I did concentrate on family sex education and the importance of incorporating discussions about pleasure in comprehensive sex education at home. So that's a bit about my background. What else did I want to tell you? So while I am talking to you, I will do my best to use gender inclusive language, except in cases where the specifics of gender are relevant. And when I'm talking about gender or any other specific identities, I just want to preface everything by saying that I am not trying to say that everyone who holds a particular identity has a specific experience. I also want to acknowledge that we all hold multiple identities, and later on I am going to be talking a little bit about privileged identities versus less privileged or marginalized identities. And again, I just want to acknowledge that people can hold multiple identities, some which are privileged, some which are not. And so when I am making statements about those identities, I don't want anyone to think that I am talking about you or your experience specifically, because I don't know your experience. I'm just checking the comments. Oh, so can I send you, yes, I can send you a Facebook message when the chat is done. And again, my name is Nadine Thornhill. Also, a little note about language. Sometimes I swear and I get a little, R-rated with my language. So I hope that doesn't offend anyone, because it just pops out sometime. All right, so before I dive into me talking, which I could do all day, I want to ask you guys a question. And so my first question is, pardon me, I have my notes on my phone, so that's why I'm looking down. My first question is, why do you think that people choose to have partnered sex? Sorry, that's another thing. I will qualify, partnered sex versus solo sex or masturbation. So why do you think people choose to have partnered sex? I have my list of reasons, but I want to hear or read some of your reasons first. There's that train again. So for those of you who are watching this later, or who may be having this conversation in a classroom, you can give a pause and get some answers from the people in your group. But different reasons that people might choose to have partnered sex is because it feels good physically. They might do it to feel intimate or close to someone. It can be an expression of love. It can be a way of consummating a particular bond, like a marriage. It can be an expression of commitment. People might choose to have partnered sex for attention or for approval. Some people choose to have sex to make money. People may choose to have partnered sex to start a pregnancy if they, have the kind of sexual body parts that, when you put them together, starts a pregnancy. People can choose to have partnered sex for fun, for stress relief. I'm just going to close my office door. I definitely know folks who have chosen to have partnered sex as a way of trying to induce labor. So there are all sorts of reasons. There are more reasons, but many, if not all of these reasons, have to do with wanting to feel good, or at least wanting to feel better than the way we had felt previously. And feeling good is a very simple definition of pleasure. Sex is something that we often do for some sort of pleasurable experience. So my next question is, how would you define a healthy relationship, or what are some elements of a healthy relationship? And when I say relationship, that could definitely mean, a long-term, sort of romantic, lots of feels involved kind of association. But that can be, any kind of sexual relationship. So that could be, a monogamous sexual relationship, a polyamorous sexual relationship, a casual sexual relationship, friends with benefits, a, one night or one time sort of sexual relationship, basically any two or more people who are having sex with each other. So what makes a healthy sexual relationship? And again, I have my own thoughts and, sort of my own data that I've gathered around this, but I always like to hear or read what other folks have to say about that. Okay, so in a healthy relationship, Sarah, hi Sarah, says that consent is clear. I really like that. And that's sort of what this whole talk is about, is trying to make consent clear. Barb says respect. Yup, love that answer. Heidi, communication, clear expectations. Love it, love it, love it. Heidi also says good self-esteem is part of a healthy sexual relationship. Honesty. Okay, dope, Chantal. Agreed. Cam says that some elements include things like trust, faithfulness, understanding, proper communication, honesty. Yeah, and all of those things can be present in any of these sort of sexual relationship structures. Barb says clear boundaries. Chantal says feeling safe. And I agree with all of those. All of those are things that I have on my list as well. So these are amazing answers. And again, if you are watching this later, or you are, sort of broadcasting this in a classroom or group setting, give people a chance to sort of shout out their answers of what are components of a healthy sexual relationship. And I think all of these are super, super important and valid answers. I also think that by definition, a healthy sexual relationship needs to be mutual. And so what that means is that when we're having this shared experience of partnered sex, that everyone involved has an equal voice and everyone has an equal stake in crafting what that sexual experience is. And when I say equal, that doesn't mean that everyone gets the same thing. So it's not a tit for tat sexual experience, pardon the pun. So for example, if, I'm like, I'm really into having my partner go down on me, therefore I must go down on my partner. Well, they may or may not want that. And if they don't want that, that's fine. But I should have as much power to say that these are the things that will make me feel good. These are the things that I don't want to engage with. These are my feelings, as the other person has. And we should be able to sort of come to that experience as equals. And consent is essential in order for that, shared mutual experience to happen. And it encompasses all of the things that, you guys mentioned, clear boundaries, feeling safe, trust, being honest, communication. All of those things are encompassed in what I call authentic consent. Consent that comes from a place of really wanting to craft that mutual shared sexual experience. All right, so someone who I think has, a fantastic take on, sort of sexual relationships and how to frame them is an educator named Al Vernacchio. And he has a TED Talk called Sex Needs a New Metaphor. And I have a link to that TED Talk, so it should pop up in the comments down, over here on the side in a moment. If you haven't seen this TED Talk, it's actually fairly popular, so some of you may have seen it already. But if you haven't seen the TED Talk, Al Vernacchio talks about how the traditional metaphor for sex in our society being, English-speaking North American society, is baseball. And that is a problematic metaphor for a lot of reasons, because it frames sex as being competitive. There is a winner and there is a loser. And it frames sex as, something that has to be done in a very specific way, because baseball has rules, right? Like, you have to round the bases in a particular order. Once you start the game, you have to finish the game. There have to be 9 innings. And so it sets sex up as this thing where one person wins, one person loses. One person is stealing the bases from their competitor who's trying to stop them. And that becomes problematic for a lot of reasons, because if we think about sex as, a if we think about sex as a competition rather than experience that we're sharing, then by definition, it's sort of like one person has to take from the other person or has to defeat the other person in order to get what they want. And that's a very combative, like adversarial way of approaching sex and sexual relationships. Chantal, you love him. Me too. He's fantastic. I got to meet him once. He was lovely. It was amazing. If you can see Chantal's comment, there's a little pizza icon because the metaphor that Al Vernacchio recommends instead is the metaphor of sharing pizza. Because when we want to share a pizza with someone, we will, ask them or invite them. We're not like, hey, just eat this pizza that I'm randomly giving to you. We will, discuss and communicate about what we want that pizza to be. What kind of toppings do we want? What kind of crust do we like? Where are we going to go to get the pizza? We can eat pizza the way we want to eat the pizza. You can eat pizza with your hands. You can eat pizza with a knife and fork. You can eat pizza crust backwards. You can eat it from the side. You can do whatever you want to do. There aren't, you have to eat the pizza in this particular order, in this particular way. If we decide that we do want to, go out and share this pizza, that doesn't mean that, well, now every time that you want to have pizza with me, we're just going to go have pizza. No, you may want to sometimes, you may not want to other times, and that's considered completely normal. Other great things that I love about the pizza metaphor that Al doesn't talk about directly, but I think still apply, is that we can talk about the pizza while we're eating the pizza and check in with each other. Like, hey, how do you like the pizza? It's great. Or, well, crust is, a little too crispy for my taste, or these artichokes aren't as fresh as they could be. I don't know why I went to artichokes. I've only had that on my pizza once, but anyway. We can decide when we're done with the pizza. And it's totally okay and totally normal if one person wants to stop eating pizza before the other person. The other person just continues eating their own pizza. Metaphor for masturbation, which is also a thing that can happen in sexual relationships or shared sexual experiences. We can also, while we're having the pizza, if something isn't right with the pizza, it's okay to sort of adjust and try to fix that. So like, oh, my pizza's too hot. Okay, well, let's just leave it for a moment and let it cool off. Or my pizza's not hot enough. Let's put it in the microwave. Or it's not crispy enough. Well, let's, pop it in the oven or pop it on, the stove for a minute and try to crisp it up. Or if it's like, you know what, I'm just really not into this pizza, you just stop. And that's normal. So I love the pizza metaphor, and I'm going to keep coming back to pizza and food metaphors as we are going through this conversation. All right, so my next question before we start off the next part of the talk is, because it's all about pleasure, so my question to you is, what is pleasure, or what makes an experience pleasurable, be it, a sexual experience or just broadly speaking, what is pleasure? All right, I'm going to try and keep up with the comments as they come in. And if you don't want to answer this question in the comments, that's fine, because when we're talking about pleasure, particularly sexual pleasure, some of that is very personal and individual. And for some people, that's private, and that's totally okay. So even if you don't want to answer publicly, I invite you to think about, what pleasure means to you specifically. So Sarah, yeah, it is something that is enjoyable for the both of you. I love that. Heidi, feels good physically and emotionally. Okay, you are setting me up perfectly. I love this. Oh, can I repeat the question? So the question was, what is pleasure, or what makes an experience pleasurable, was the question. Okay, got it. And sorry, I should have said off the top, feel free to dive in with a comment anytime, regardless of whether I've prompted or not. So pleasure is something that is enjoyable for both of you, that feels good physically and emotionally. So that is almost exactly how I was going to kick off this segment of the conversation. Yeah, so pleasure is something that is enjoyable for whoever is involved in the activity or experience. And it feels good physically, emotionally, and I'm going to add one more component to that, which is ethically / spiritually. And I'm going to break down what all of those components are and sort of how they work. So sadomasochism. Sadomasochism 100% can be pleasurable. A lot of people, find a lot of pleasure in either receiving or inflicting pain. Pleasure and pain go hand in hand, but within reasonable limits and consent, 100%. So before I dive in, I want to talk about that too, that pleasure is also very individual. The way that our bodies process sensation, our emotional connection to certain experiences, the ethics and values that we have around certain types of experiences or, sensations, they're all going to be different for different people, and that's totally okay. So I read a great expression actually earlier today that said, your normal is the new normal. So whatever is normal, whatever feels good for you, that is valid. So so pleasure. So we're going to talk about physical pleasure, emotional pleasure, and ethical / spiritual pleasure. Physical pleasure is usually the pleasure that most people think of when you say the words sexual pleasure. So if we're going to go back to our pizza metaphor, the physically pleasurable part of the pizza is typically how the pizza smells and how it tastes when you put it in your mouth, and that like warm feeling when it goes down into your stomach. Or if you're like me and you love a cold pizza, then that just like nice carby, full, cool feeling in your stomach. And similarly with sex, pizza, or I'm getting my metaphors confused. Similarly with sex, the physically pleasurable part of sex is the part that feels good in our bodies. So, the temperature of this room is perfect, and I feel really good being naked right now. I love the feeling of my partner's velvety lips against mine. This lube makes penetration really, really comfortable and feel really, really good. I am into certain kinds of pain, and I love the way it feels, to have my, skin slapped, or, getting smacked on the butt, or even, something like being whipped. Some people, enjoy that really sort of sharp, acute pain of, feeling something like a needle. That is the physically pleasurable part of sex. Then we come to the emotional part of sex. So again, if we were going back to pizza, the parts of eating pizza that I find emotionally pleasurable are pizza is like, I associate pizza with, having a treat. It's a fun treat food. And so when I'm going to have pizza, I'm really excited. By coincidence, I'm having pizza for dinner tonight, and I'm really excited, looking forward to it. Again, that like amazing, like cheesy, carby goodness makes me feel very content. I feel emotionally content when I'm eating pizza, and when I've had a really good pizza, it gives me a really satisfied feeling. So those are sort of the emotionally pleasurable parts of eating a pizza. Emotionally pleasurable parts of sex might be, again, I'm really excited about having sex with this particular person. I really like the person I'm about to have sex with. I love the person I'm about to have sex with. This person finds me attractive, and that makes me feel fantastic and confident about myself. I'm just glad that we are sharing this experience together. And other things that, you mentioned earlier in the comments, I feel safe. I feel cared for. I feel that I trust this person that I'm about to have sex with. Those are all things that are emotionally pleasurable. So I did not want to ask folks what they find physically pleasurable about sex, because I just find that that's really personal. You are welcome to share, though, if you want to. But I will ask, what are some aspects of sex that you find emotionally pleasurable, if you would like to share? Again, no pressure, because that would be really ironic in a talk about consent. But yeah, if you would like to share, what you find emotionally or, physically pleasurable, if you want to, I invite you to do so. And again, for those of you doing this in a classroom setting, just because there can be sort of issues around privacy, and it's often difficult, I think particularly for teens to talk about, their physical pleasure in a group setting. Again, you can just invite them to think about that for themselves. I should also mention at this point that when you are younger, if you haven't had many sexual experiences, or you haven't had any sexual experiences, you can still have a sense of what you do and don't find pleasurable, particularly physically, but also emotionally and in terms of your ethics. But it is also very normal to not have as clear of a sense of what you do and don't want, because you simply haven't had sort of the breadth of experience to base your feelings on. And so I think it's definitely important to listen to your instincts. If a partner suggests a certain sexual activity and your instinct is like, blah, blah, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. If somebody suggests a sexual activity and you're like, I don't know, but I'm not into that. It is also okay in a consensual relationship to explore, and make discoveries about what you like and what you may not like. That is okay, and it is a healthy part of sexual exploration. Okay, so finally, there is the ethical / spiritual, I sometimes call it value-based pleasure. And this is, does the sex that I'm having, or does this sexual experience and the way it's sort of unfolding align with my beliefs about, who I am as a person and what I believe to be right and what I believe to be wrong. So again, even when we're talking about something like pizza, there can be, a values-based component. So for example, my mother and father-in-law are Jewish, and they keep somewhat kosher. So when they order a pizza, they're never going to order, pepperoni or really any kind of meat on their pizza. Someone who is a vegetarian and, doesn't or believes it's wrong to eat animal flesh, also not going to put meat on their pizza. Someone for whom it's very important to be frugal may say to their partner, hey, you know what? I'm not really up for spending all this money at a restaurant, but why don't we make pizza at home instead? And then there are some people who might say, you know what? I don't eat pizza. Like I have, other dietary restrictions or rules, and pizza is not something that I'm going to eat. It doesn't fit within sort of my ethical parameters around food. So let's have something else, or you go ahead and have pizza and I'm just not going to. So again, we can have those same sort of ethical, spiritual, values-based, they may be religious, they may not be, sort of parameters around our sexual experiences. I believe that it is important to treat people with respect. So, I am going to pay attention to what this person wants. I am going to, talk to them and communicate with them and treat them like a human being. You should always do that. That is one of my values. I believe some people believe that they should wait for a certain milestone or a certain commitment. You know, some people believe, for example, I need to wait until I'm married to have sex. That is, you know, a value that will influence how pleasurable sex could be for somebody. Somebody else might believe in ethical non-monogamy, and so they need to be honest and open with all of their sexual partners about the fact that they may have other sexual partners, and make sure that anyone that they're having sex with is okay and comfortable with that. There's also, you know, ethical kink. So again, we were talking earlier about, you know, inflicting pain, you know, using restraint or having that done to you. Those are things that can be done within an ethical framework where there is negotiation and there's consent and everyone involved has agreed to what's going to happen. Everyone still has the freedom to, you know, express what they need or, you know, establish boundaries at any point. That is ethical kink. Wow, my tongue is tied. Something else that, you know, I believe, or a value that I hold, is that it's very important to me to take care of my health, and that includes my sexual health. And so, you know, my partner and I, even though we've been together for like 22 years, you know, we still talk about things like, you know, what kind of safer sex are we going to practice? I, you know, make sure that I go and I have, you know, my checkup with my doctor on a regular basis so that I can, you know, I know what's going on with my cervix and my uterus and all of that. That is very important to me. And if we weren't doing that, I would not be able to enjoy sex in the same way. My partner seeks constant consent from me. It was new and different and clumsy for me at first, and it forces you to be really present and checking in with yourself as well as your partner. But it's a big part of our ability to trust and comfort each other and be intimate. I love that. I really love that. Yeah, without consent, there could, and Cam says, without consent, there could be legal and ethical issues, 100%. And so again, coming back to those pieces, I don't think that you can have pleasurable sex without there being consent, because there are all of these components that need to be discussed, need to be communicated about, and need to be negotiated. And so, you know, we need to have consent as this sort of, you know, living, breathing, ever-evolving aspect of our sexual experiences. We need to be able to communicate about it before, we need to be able to communicate about it during, and we need to be able to communicate about it afterwards. Something that I find interesting is that in almost any other sort of shared pleasurable experience, whether that be sharing a pizza, whether that be going to see a movie together, whether that be, you know, going on a trip, we would think it was ludicrous if the expectation was, what you need to do is you just need to wordlessly share this experience with one another, and somehow it will be amazing. And yet, that is our expectation often when it comes to, you know, what makes a great sexual experience. You know, it is often depicted to us as just two people in a room who suddenly start tearing each other's clothes off and then just kind of fall on top of each other, and it's amazing. And yeah, that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. All right. So when it comes to sex education, particularly in formal spaces like schools, pleasure is the one aspect of sex and sexuality that either gets glossed over and sort of only alluded to in very vague ways, or in most cases, avoided altogether. There's no discussion of, you know, pleasure at all. We'll talk about, you know, preventing illness. We'll talk about preventing pregnancy. We'll talk about, you know, STI symptoms. We'll even talk about other components of healthy relationships, but we will not talk about sexual pleasure. So my question for you now is, why do you think that is? thank you, Sarah. All right. So there are many complex reasons, but I can boil most of them down to one of three sort of broad strokes reasons. One reason I think that we tend to gloss over sexual pleasure in our sex ed, and again, I'm speaking more so about North America, like traditional North American sex ed. Oh, Sarah says, afraid of making it attractive to young ones. Yes. And I think, yeah, we don't want to make it seem too attractive. And I think, yeah, one of the broad strokes reasons is that we have this idea that pleasure will make us irresponsible. And in terms of, in terms of sex, it's like if we say out loud that sex is pleasurable, then, kids are going to run out and they're going to have like all kinds of sex with everyone. And they're, not going to practice safer sex, and they're going to get all sorts of STIs, and they're going to, and there's just going to be rampant unintended pregnancy. So yeah, there's this idea that pleasure is something that we cannot control at all. And so again, we have to put these like really tight parameters around it and like not tell anyone that it's a thing. The second reason is because I think there is an idea in our culture that pleasure is lazy and indulgent. So we live in a society that values utility, and part of that is valuing the idea of work, of hard work, and of pleasure being this sort of rare reward that we have to earn with our hard work. And in an ideal circumstance, sex isn't work unless what you do is sex work, which we totally stigmatize in our culture. So yeah, the idea that like you're just going to have sexual pleasure when you didn't work for it is highly stigmatized. And then finally, I believe that there is a very oppressive there is an oppressive attitude towards pleasure, and I'm going to get into that more in a little bit, but that pleasure is only something that you can have if you hold certain identities and if you are within certain relationship structures that place, really strict boundaries around it. So basically, if you are young, but not super young, like if you are, an adult of marrying age, if you are married, if you are heterosexual, if you are white or have, at least sort of a typically Eurocentric features, if you fit into that model of beauty, then you're free. Like have all the sex and sexual pleasure you want because we've put all of these constraints around it. But the farther you are from holding those identities, or the farther away your relationship is from that like heterosexual, monogamous, married structure, then the less entitled you are to pleasure because you are doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. It's fine. But that is the attitude that has been pervasive in our society for centuries. And it's taking us a while to sort of unlearn that attitude around pleasure. And the unfortunate thing is then we don't include pleasure in our education when we speak to young people. And so it just sort of becomes this thing where we either assume like, it's fine, like they know that, instead of something that we think about practicing and talking about and negotiating. So yeah, where I find this is really problematic around consent is that because we don't want to talk about the pleasurable aspect, because we don't want to talk about, the importance of everyone involved in a sexual experience having physical, emotional, and ethical pleasure, then consent just becomes this technicality. And it allows people to approach consent with the attitude of, oh, well, as long as I just hear a yes, or I see my partner nod, then I'm good to go. Or there's the flip side, which is, okay, well, technically I did say yes, or technically I did nod when they asked if I wanted to do this thing, so it was consensual. And then if that person who gave that technical consent, felt uncomfortable beforehand, didn't enjoy the experience while it was happening, and feels shitty afterwards, that's not okay. It's not and it completely belies the purpose of sharing a sexual experience. Toby says, we're just going back to the question of why we don't talk about consent. They believe they need to learn it once, they are the right age, and they are afraid the young ones might do it or are going to be aggressive about it. Bang on. Yeah. And so if the person who, technically got consent didn't have any, particular concern, or didn't feel any responsibility for their partner's experience or their partner's pleasure, that's exploitative. Even if it's not legally, even if they haven't broken the law, or even if technically it was consensual sex, if they are just using someone for their own benefit and for their own pleasurable experience, and they don't care what their partner's experience was, it's still super shitty. And it's potentially extremely harmful for that other partner. And so I believe passionately and emphatically that part of consent needs to involve caring and, bearing responsibility not only for our own pleasure, but for the pleasure of the person that we are sharing that experience with. If we do not give a shit how they feel, then in my professional opinion, it's not real consent. All right. So, oh my gosh, it's 12:40 already. I can talk a long time. So I am going to talk a little bit about entitlement. Now, entitlement is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It sort of depends on how it plays out. But in our culture, there are people that we generally think of as being more entitled to pleasure, and people that we think of as being less entitled to pleasure. Or I should say, rather than people, I should say that there are identities that sort of give us, that people, that we can hold identities, and those identities give us sort of more access or more permission to experience pleasure. And then there are certain identities, which are usually the opposite identities, where the perception is that we don't have the same access to pleasure. So I'm going to ask you, in your opinion, what are identities? So identities can be, gender, ethnicity, race, religion, age, body type, all sorts of things. What are some identities that in our culture we often treat as having more of an entitlement to pleasure? All right, so I'm going to keep scanning the comments for your input, but generally speaking, some identities that give you more access or entitlement to pleasure, they don't actually give you more entitlement, but we treat those identities as having more inherent entitlement to pleasure, are men are often treated as being more entitled to pleasure, or at least more entitled to certain types of pleasure. White people, able-bodied people, thin people, older people. And when I say older people, I mean people who are not teenagers or children. but not so old. Like elderly people are not entitled to pleasure, so much entitled to pleasure in our culture, but sort of just adults. Cisgender folk are more entitled to pleasure. Economically advantaged folk are treated as more entitled to pleasure. If I have to hear one more time about how someone who is poor is irresponsible because they are spending what little money they have on something purely for the enjoyment of it, my head is going to explode. Yeah, so those are some identities that we treat as being more entitled to pleasure. And if there are any others you have thought of, feel free to leave them on the side. So here's the thing. Those people or having those identities does not mean that you aren't entitled to pleasure. It just means that you are not entitled to pleasure at the expense of other people's safety. And yet, if you hold those identities, and the more of those identities you have, the more likely it is that we as a society are going to let you get away with accessing pleasure at the expense of people who hold less privileged identities. So, for example, I'm just going to start with, men versus not men, and more particularly cisgender men, and even more specifically, well, just someone who holds all these identities. So a white, able-bodied, fit, adult, cis, economically advantaged, straight man can often grow up, being like, hey, yeah, I'm going to get some sex. And that is completely acceptable. I think of the thousands and thousands and thousands of songs performed by men who hold all of these identities about how they're, gonna get that girl no matter what. And that's like super creepy. And when people who hold identities other than that express those sort of feelings or those sort of intentions, it's rightly called out as being super creepy. And yet, if you hold a certain identity, you can get away with that behavior a lot more than other people can. And so the converse is also true, that if you sort of hold other identities, so if you are a woman, if you are a person of color, if you have a disability, if you are fat, if you are young, or you are elderly, if you are trans or non-binary, if you are poor, you are often seen as being inherently less entitled to pleasure, less entitled to comfort, less entitled to assert your boundaries when you are with people who hold more privileged identities. And so again, we see this dichotomy sort of play out sometimes in heterosexual relationships, and again, or just the way that people in heterosexual dynamics sometimes relate to each other in a sexual context. We tell men and boys that it is their job to get sex, to go after that pleasurable experience. We tell women and girls that it is their responsibility to be the gatekeepers. It is their responsibility to put up those boundaries. We almost never talk to girls and women about, their own pleasure and what do they want and what feels good in their bodies and what feels good for them emotionally and what feels good for them, physically and spiritually. So very recently, I was putting together a lesson plan about sexual anatomy for like 5th, 6th graders. And I was creating diagrams of internal and external sexual anatomy. And for folks who have a penis, and understanding that not everyone with a penis is a man, not everyone with a vulva is a woman. But for people who have bodies with a penis, you know, the penis is there, and, you know, the urethra is there, and the head of the penis is there. And when, you know, I would go and reference my materials, there was always, you know, discussion of how the urethra was the tube by which, you know, semen was ejaculated. We talked about, you know, it talked very explicitly about erections. It even talked about the head of the penis having a lot of nerve endings and, you know, being very sensitive to touch. When you looked at, you know, the diagrams of the vulva and sort of the internal structure of people with a uterus, in many cases, there is no clitoris, particularly if you look at materials that's geared towards younger kids. It's the only organ on the human body whose sole function is, you know, transmission of sensation, and in many cases, sexual pleasure. For many, many people who have clitorises, they need clitoral stimulation to enjoy orgasm. Not that orgasm is the only way to enjoy sexual pleasure, but it's not there. And I was not able to find a single diagram that included the internal structure of the clitoris in the internal diagram. And so even sort of small, seemingly innocuous differences like that set us up to think, well, yeah, pleasure is just natural and inherent for people with penises. But if you have a vulva, it's not that important. It's important. It's still important. So we really need to think about not only incorporating pleasure into our sex ed, but who we talk to about pleasure and making it clear that everyone has a right to experience that pleasure, that nobody's entitlement to pleasure supersedes anybody else's entitlement to pleasure. I'm still looking at my notes. All right, so I only have 10 minutes, so I need to wrap up. So I'm gonna go back to my pizza metaphor, and we're gonna use this as a structure for talking about how to actually practically navigate consent. So if you want to, you know, have the experience of sharing pizza with someone, excuse me, the first thing you do is you ask them or you invite them. You know, I'd love to take you out for pizza, or I'd love to have pizza with you. I'd love to have you over to my place for pizza. Would you like to come? Is that something you would like to do? You know, you don't, you know, sort of forcibly nudge them towards the pizzeria without them saying something, or, you know, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna yawn and like slowly shove you this way in the direction of where the pizza is. No, you like explicitly ask them, and if they say yes, that's great. If they say no, you're usually gonna let it go. So if someone says no, same thing with sex, you know, ask them, invite them, like, I would love to be with you. I'd love to have sex with you. I think you're really attractive. Like, are you interested? And then give them the space to answer how they want to. And if the answer is no, let it go. If the answer is like, that is not an expression of pleasure or excitement or really wanting to do something. So let it go. Something I didn't get to dive into is that oftentimes people who hold less privileged identities are trained to accommodate and not upset people with more privileged identities. So for example, as a Black woman, it has taken me 42 years and I am still learning how to override that impulse that has been sort of bred into me that you need to defer to white men because they're in charge and they're more important than you. They're not, you know, white men, no, love a lot of them, but they're not inherently better or more entitled to things than I am. But that is often, those are the lessons that I picked up just growing up in this culture. So yeah, you know, just because someone isn't out and out like, no, doesn't mean that they're like, yeah, I would totally love to do that. I just, you know, suddenly forgot how to talk. If they don't seem like enthused or particularly interested, they're probably not, so let it go. The next thing that happens if you do decide to share pizza together is that there is a discussion and there is a negotiation, because you have to decide, what do you want on the pizza? Well, first you have to decide, where do you want to go to get the pizza? What do you want on the pizza? What don't you want on the pizza? Are you both going all in on everything? Are you going to like half and half it? What kind of crust do you want? Like, there is a menu usually, and you will pick from the menu and figure out how to craft a pizza that you will likely both enjoy. So you might be saying, well, Nadine, there's no menu for what you want to do sexually, except there is. There is something called a yes, no, maybe chart, and you can find them all sorts of places. If you Google yes, no, maybe chart on the internet, you will find them. I believe there's going to be a link here to one that I love from a website called scarletine.com, and it's geared specifically towards youth, but I find it's great for people of any age. And it's very thorough, and it's really just a list of, you know, different sexual activities. So like, you know, positions, situations, locations, sexual acts, and you can go through either on your own or with your sexual partner and go through and say like, yeah, I'm down for that. No, not down for that. I might be down for that. Depends on the circumstances. This one doesn't apply to us because we don't have those body parts, or we don't have those sex toys, or we, you know, can't go to that location. And you can just go through, and that's kind of like your menu. And like when you are sharing a meal, you can talk about the sex and communicate about the sex while you are having the sex. As I said, that model of sex where it's just like, let's just, you know, wordlessly, you know, be on each other. It's not how any of this works. So yeah, you know, during sex, you know, if something isn't feeling right, you know, for example, if something is not feeling right physically, you're like, man, you know, I'm going down on you and my knees really hurt, then something needs to change. And that thing may be just as simple as, okay, we need to reposition and get in a chair. If it's, you know what, I thought that I was okay with, you know, my partner coming on my boobs, and I realized that I'm really not. It's okay. You can say that. And then, you know, if you're the partner who's about to come somewhere else. Don't come on their boobs because they're not going to enjoy it. Right down to, wow, you know what? I thought that I was going to be into this, and I'm not, and I need to stop. I just need this to stop. You know, then that person gets to stop. And it is also important as a sexual partner to pay attention not only to words, pay attention to body language. So grimacing is usually a sign that something is uncomfortable. You know, if a person kind of freezes and goes rigid and is not responding, they may be having a trauma reaction. So if you sort of notice something is odd or has changed in your partner's body language, in the noises they're making, in their response in general, just check in. Like, you know, are you okay? Do you want to keep going? Do you need to stop? Do you need to change positions? You know, give them a chance to tell you, like, this is not working for me in some way. And then, you know, there is the post pizza or post sex. When you finish your meal, you're not usually like, okay, I'm just going to wordlessly get up and leave now. And we're never going to talk about the fact that we had pizza ever. You're going to talk about it like, oh, you know, I'm so full. Oh, that was so delicious. Like, oh, I don't think those tomatoes were, you know, were entirely ripe. You're going to debrief about it. And I think that it's really important and really kind, you know, even if you're talking about a casual or one-time sexual encounter, for that time you still had some sort of relationship with that person. So debrief with them, you know, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Is there anything you need? You know, at the very least, you know, call or text the person the next day and be like, how's it going? And also just be open to whatever feedback you're getting either from them or from yourself. You know, pay attention to, you know, your emotions the next day. Pay attention to how you feel the next day physically in your body. Those are all important signs. You know, and care about how your partner feels the next day, how they feel emotionally, how they feel physically, how they feel, ethically and spiritually. Talk about that. So I'm gonna have to wrap up because it's like 2 minutes to 1. I'm gonna stick around for a while if anyone has any questions for me, or any more comments they want to share. But all of this boils down to sex should feel good. And if you are going to have sex with another person, then you need to give a shit about whether or not the sex you're having with them feels good for them. And that is consent. So before I take your questions and sign off, I'll just let you know where you can find me. So you can go to my website, which is NadineThornhill.com, so myname.com. I also have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and just type in Nadine Thornhill, I'll come up. But I have one video in particular that I will, I think the link will be down here in the comments, called Sexual Pleasure and Consent. I think that's the title. I should know the title of my own videos, and yet. But the link will be down here, and it's sort of a, it's sort of like a briefer summary of what we just talked about here, if you want to check that out. You can also find me on Twitter at Nadine Thornhill. I generally post I either post, links to videos and articles, or I post snarky takes on politics and social issues, and occasionally videos of cats. Yeah, so that's where you can find me. Oh, and if you want to email me, I am at info@nadinethornhill.com. So thank you for listening to me. I hope I did not speak too fast. I loved all of your comments. Thank you so much for all of your participation. This was amazing. And you had so many great insights. So yeah, I'm gonna stick around for like 5 more minutes. So if you want to comment or ask me any of the, oh, thanks, Chantel. If you want to comment or ask me any other questions, please do. Kims, I will Facebook message you. Thank you, everyone. Aw, you guys are great. Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm here for like another 4 or so minutes, and then I will log off. But like I said, if you have questions that pop up or comments that pop up subsequent to my logging off, find me on any of those platforms. You know what? While I am waiting, I'm going to, in the comments here, type in all of my info for you guys, because, okay, so that's not my email. That's not an email address. Okay, let me delete that and write it properly. Okay. And thank you for all the wonderful feedback. You guys are just lovely. And this was so much fun. Okay, so that's my email. And my Twitter is, that's my Twitter for snarky commentary on things going on in the world. And I will put my YouTube channel here as well. There. Okay, so yeah, please do get in touch. I would love to chat with you. And just so you know, I'm also always available for workshops. I do one-on-one consultation with parents and caregivers. So all of that info is also on my website. Yeah, so if you ever want to work with me, I would love to work with you. But if you just want to like say hi, hit me up on Twitter or email me or whatever you would like. All right. Any other questions or comments for me right now? I'm sure folks need to you need to get back to whatever you're up to today. And I'm really hungry, and all of this talking about pizza has just intensified that hunger. So, but tonight I'm having pizza, so I just need to find something equally delicious and pleasurable to enjoy for my lunch. All right, so I am going to log off now, but thank you so much for joining me. And for those of you who are watching this on the replay, thank you for watching. This was a pleasure and an honor. And hopefully I will be able to connect with you very, very soon. All right, have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.